Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world. I am Paul Sisler, and this is In the Moment. Today, we have the Vellum, and we have T. Paul Wolfrick, and we are going to be talking about world building and editing. T. Paul, hello, hello, hello.
Hello. Hey.
And how are you today, my brother?
I would say that I'm doing pretty good. I'm now officially in draft 3 of Snake of the Dame. That means I'm nearly finished. Uh, I have already gotten, and before anyone thinks, okay, you got the first one done, and what about the second, third? Third one's already started, and the second one just needs editing. I'm already halfway through Night Terror Rising at this point, and that's a big deal. And the story itself, the volume is 5 books. It's 5 short books, and so um, I'm looking at it on a macro level right now because of the fact that I'm looking at specific beats, specific parts, and that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about as part of the editing topic. But kids are good. Wife is good. Uh, Financially, a bit on the waiting for tax return to come in, but overall things are good.
Yes. Financially, most of us are just like, what in the hell are we going to do to get through the week? Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's
But
always where I'm at.
politics, we'll bring that in on a later day. Catch me
Yep.
on controversy and comedy, okay? Catch me with Joe Walsh, okay? There you go. All right, world building and editing. I have just I got a email, which I can't go into any more than that, but it was a very nice, good email. Um,
Oh, yeah, you
I
were singing like a canary yesterday.
yes, my inspiration to get back into my writing has just been increased, 100-fold, and I'm looking very forward to getting book one of the Rainbow Prophecy done here within the next few months. So I'm excited. My world building and my editing, which we're going to be talking about today, is huge. World building is huge when writing a book, especially when you're creating a world that you want the people to see through the eyes of your characters.
Or
So the
live in, or breathe in, or taste, or feel, or touch, or
yes,
any of those things.
yes, yes.
I actually, this latest rendition, because I used to hate world building, to be honest with you. I used to dislike it because it was so like I was so involved in character creation and landing beats, things like that, that like I would be like, wait, I have to create a government now. Wait, I have to create this. Wait, I have to create that. Wait, I have like all the things, the drop down list of things you got to do. I am actually liking it a lot more now. Like I, with this Stake of the Dame story, which I'll be talking about a lot more as time goes by and as we do more of these things this month. Especially since Take the Name is on pre-order, by the way. But basically, I I do a lot of world building, especially with religions and especially with like in the political sphere, because like one of my main characters is a goddamn prince, so you can't have that without politics being somewhere in there. I just be very
Right.
careful not to let it overtake the narrative, so to speak. So for me, a way I handle politics in my story is I ask questions like, well, if he's with people he loves, like his father, his friends, his mom, uh, is this a question of duty versus love? Is he having to sacrifice things? Does he sacrifice his role as prince if he goes off and fights monsters? Like there's that tug of war going on. And initially, in the very beginning of Snake the Dame, in fact, his father goes and tells him like a couple times, he's like, you should probably go to court. And like it feels like a throwaway punchline. But then like I go, by the time I get to I think it was like chapter 4 or 5, I jokingly called it bitch fits. I don't know if it's gonna stay that way. But basically it's because of the fact that one of the characters in there is his cousin's grandmother, who is escalating in conflict when it comes to her insanity and like their family trait. So that's playing a role in the scene and it's causing her to be a bit more diabolical. But how I handle the politics is I go, well, politics is literally just having different opinions and how you handle a financial system. So let's have that be in the background as the setting, and then let's have the characters on top of it as a platform. And that way, you also are still emotionally connected to the characters, and you're also not like entering an emotional argument in your head of, well, that's more left wing or that's more right wing. It's like, no, it's politics. And these characters just having their, stances and their opinions, but you don't let it over, it for me in this story, this frame of things, it plays on the sociological aspect of things and how they socialize with each other and how they're interacting. It plays on the language of how they're talking to each other. And remember, in this world, we don't have TikTok, we don't have Twitter. I don't talk about like that. Doesn't become a topic in this story. Like this is set in the summer or before the summer because Crimson Nightfall takes place in summer of 2001. So this story is like before then. It's like in April to May. And then I was like thinking about it the other day. I'm like, wait a minute, Snake of the Day occurs over the course of like a week and a half, and then like Storms of Blood and those other ones. Kind of like this whole volume takes place in the course of just before the summer of 2001. So if you have a cell phone, it's probably like older than like a smartphone type of thing. But it's got you've got like this touchscreen or not touchscreen, this touchscreen wristband on your arm as a student at Heroicum Academy, and that touchscreen allows you to see your schedule. So there's still some touches of our current world in there, but it's not at the scale that we're at right now because it's before 2020. So like I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, what would the world be like if I fast forwarded 20 years? Because there's also aliens in this world, and there's supernatural elements and vampires and werewolves and fairies, and you got fairy magic and this stuff that us humans just talk about as part of the myth lore. In this world, that's just like telling you it's Saturday or that it's the sky's blue. So like, how do you tackle that with world building in your story?
Well, first, for those that aren't writers that are in here listening to us and all that, let me explain what world building is, because when you hear the word yes, when you hear world building, a lot of people may assume that you're creating a country, you're creating wilderness, you're creating animals or whatever the case is. World building is more than just the place, the time, the era. You could be modern day, and part of your world building technique is to illustrate that it is modern day. Okay. One of my stories, I go back to the 60s. I illustrate things that happen in the 60s with farm equipment, blah, 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 and make it realistic to everything, time and era. Just like my Blood Schism, everything is time and era in relation to Central Park in New York, Edinburgh and Scotland, all the cities, all the towns. Everything is just as it is today, but you still have to build that into your setting and your plot and all of that stuff. Then you have other aspects of world building. Okay, I bring in vampires and druids in Blood Schism. I bring in demons in TJ. My dystopian one, Breathe, is futuristic. So you have to create the atmosphere of what's going on also. So we're talking what you see, the atmosphere of what you're going to feel, what you're going to hear, tastes, smells, and Breathe. The air is toxic. I mentioned sulfur. Everyone knows what sulfur smells like. So when I mention sulfur, you're just like, ooh, okay. So then you have like the politics that you were talking about, the government. What happens if you break this law? Oh, wow, this is a law. May not be a law in our time or era, but it's going to be a law in my world.
Yep.
So there's a lot of aspects that go into world building and all that. It goes beyond just the plants and the trees and the name of the countries and the states. It goes into the government, the politics, the currency, the things that you bring in, the cell phone, the technology like cell phones and stuff like that. How are they communicating? All these things are part of world building. So, how do I do this in my story? Um, with Blood Schism, everything is basically modern day as it is. The politics of the world is kind of what it is right now. But I really illustrate that with the vampires and the druids. And as you read along, you're going to see a mentality and a personality types that go along with each of these different creatures. Okay. And how they treat each other, how they treat other human beings, how they treat other people within their own, creature status. And you're going to recognize some things. So there's undertones of politics in this world that I'm creating, and there's misogyny, there's hate, there's bigotry, there's racism, there's forms of systemic discrimination, corruption in politics, corruption in government, not caring for the people, stuff like that. So I take a lot of things from what we have in this world, and I also show how we can fix them, how we should fix them, how we should treat each other. So my world has a strong political influence on it, even though I never mention a party. I never mention a political group. I never mention a politician by name. I don't have any real people in this world that you would know today. I
Yeah.
change all of that. I want people to make those associations. So that world that I'm creating, yeah, it's got vampires and druids in it. We don't have vampires and druids in our real world, or do we? But so that's how I kind of build the world with TJ, taking recollection from the past. What people won't recognize at first is that there's two storylines going on at the same time. And one is basically you're in a classroom, you're not really in 1968, you're virtually watching it through a VR machine of what's going on in 1968. And then 1974, I think I go to. And then, I go through these different stages and years building up to the modern time, which is futuristic. So
Yeah.
I've created a complete sci-fi world where they're actually trying to create what they call angels for the preparation of this demon that's coming back to take over, which starts out with a little boy named TJ.
Yeah, no, I dig that. I dig that a lot because like it feels like you're taking, and instead of taking on a stance of one thing or another, you're letting the audience also decide what they think about things, as
Mm-hmm.
well as letting the characters themselves breathe in this world. That's an awesome thing. That's like for me, that's kind of what I do with mine is I have like a theme, a central theme, or I have like a central secondary and third theme that I'll inject into the story. Like for instance, Orion's character is going to be a fun one because he's not a prince. He's also not a princess. I mean, it could be a princess, but he's a everyman clerk who works with his family's convenience store that also happens to have multiple purposes to it. Like you don't just go in and get groceries. You also can go in there and stay the night if you wanted to upstairs, or you could go to the bar, or you could like later on. I'm thinking about having it to where their family actually expands it because of stuff that happens with the characters. And they maybe it becomes partial movie theater as well. Like just an all purpose like media hub for his family parent store. Because you have mom and pop shops in real life that do, little things like whether they're a nail salon or whether they're a convenience store themselves or whether they're, whatever it is that they're trying to sell. And with the joint being such a central place in this world, or one of the central places, one of the things I'm going to be doing later on is being like, oh, by the way, Orion's family ended up branching out, and now they have chains of the joint in like the Eastern realms and the Western realms. They've got like different chains going on, and then you're gonna be like, well, wait, isn't this the only business? No, like there's multiple businesses in this world. In fact, just because it's a kingdom or a series of kingdoms in this world doesn't mean they don't have businesses. Like money has to flow somewhere, and so on a world building perspective, when you go out on a instead of a macro level, which is like pieces, on a
Mhm.
holistic level, you have like the currencies, like you have the Eastern realms currency, you have the Western realms currency. And one thing I thought about was in our world, we have the American dollar as the currency, right? In this world, it's the soul cube. Like cash still technically exists because this is an alternate version of our own world. So America technically got broken up into two kingdoms. One of them Australia, one of them Brachia. But that's just part of the Western realms. You've got sky as well that floats like 10,000 feet in the air, and that's the fairy country. It like literally floats on an island, and it's in the sky. So like originally there was a paragraph in my first chapter there. Peter's like talking about this giant hulking rock that's in the sky, and I'm like, is that really relevant to the story though right now? Like that's kind of a random thing to throw in there. And so I'm like, I don't know. I have it in my previous draft, so I can easily pull it if I needed to. But I cut that paragraph because I'm like, well, right now he's not looking up, he's looking forward, and so he wouldn't be looking at like a rock that's just hovering in the sky, and you wouldn't really know what it is. You think it was a cloud or something. So so he's not focusing on that. So, but in this world, I've got fairies, I've even got mermaids, right? So you've got like kingdoms that are in the ocean. And so in this sphere of things, you have different kingdoms, different uh, you know, uh, societies that are in this world. And part of that is also being able to latch that though to characters. And so
Right.
that's part of why you have a giant cast. But for my story series, I've broken it up. That's part of why they're shorter novels now. Broken it up so you'll get like aspects of each cast in different novels. That way, I hope that makes sense as far as world building goes. Like you've got your currency, you've got your government and politics, then you've got your religions. And yes, Cthulhu is a religion in the story.
Yes. Yeah, religions. Well, it's like let me go back to TJ for a second and all that because
All right.
in TJ, I in this world that I've created, there are religions, but there are no gods. There are no deities. None of it's real. It's all make believe. It's just stories that people still believe in, but none of them existed. And TJ is the manifestation of the real thing and the beginning of it.
So
So,
he's like a god of the making.
right. And the thing of it is that he becomes a god based on the written gods that didn't exist.
Hmm. Interesting.
Okay. All right. So this God that is now manifesting itself into creation and becoming a God is basing himself off of other religions where there were no gods. So that's part of the mind blowing concept. But I bring this up because when you're world building, one of the things that you have to remember, you can take things that are historically accurate. Okay. And remember, you're writing fiction. Okay. So if you're writing fiction, everything doesn't have to be exact, precise. You can create your own
Yep.
little towns, your own little cities, blah, 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 that don't exist. Or you can use existing ones. But whatever you do, you have to keep a consistency going. Be aware of what you create, when it was created, how it affects, like if you're creating a small town that didn't exist, somewhere in that story, you might want to have um, entering Brentwood, established in 1942, on a sign or something. These are just little things, and you don't have to do that. But if you want to establish some kind of a timeline where this, came into existence, why the mentality is of, the people, you got to remember the mentality that your characters have when you're building your characters. have to do with the world that you built for them to live in.
Yep.
Well, you want
You
to
have to
kind of,
make it tangible.
yeah, so you kind of want to keep things in balance. You got to make sure that you have that balance, because if you got a loving, peaceful world and you suddenly have someone that's just evil and deranged, why are they evil and deranged? That doesn't fit into a loving, peaceful world unless there was some evil that existed that came and released itself, or whatever the case may be. You have to create that into the world.
Yep.
So
You do.
when you're building your world, make sure that you have things in balance and make sense. You got to answer the who, what, where, when, why, how.
Yep, exactly. Especially if like you're dealing with characters that have mental insanity. Is it genetic? Is it spiritual based? Did some demonic god or some godly force or mythological monster take hold of them? Did like is there some sort of cursed object? If you're in a world where gods are fictional or just stories that create humanity or creation created, did they exist before and did they just die off? Like and then there's this new character that is becoming a god. Is he able to do that by harnessing a magic that previously existed? And that's part of what balancing logic with fantasy, is finding a way to realistically put it in your fiction. That way the audience can buy into it. Because if it's just, oh, it's just there just because it can be, then the audience is going to go, well, why? And so, like, you got to answer that why. You got to answer those questions of what you're talking about and who, when, why, and where. And you got to find out a way to connect your world building not only to your characters but also to the logic of the reader. You have to keep in mind the fact that the reader has logic, and so reader will literally be like, well, what about this part? Well, what about that part? And they'll end up creating like 50 other questions that you never thought of when you were writing it, or that you were
Right.
answering yourself. And so it's good to come up with those answers beforehand, and that way, like, you'll know why that character, that scene had a dress on, and you'll know why they chose blue for whatever reason, even if like it was never said in the story. If you as the author are like, well, I know it was blue because on this day and this time that character had a memory that they were thinking of with their relative or their friend, and so they've got an emotional connection to that dress. That's why they picked it. Like, you got to at least know stuff like that, stuff that seems completely irrelevant but could easily be a backstory. When it comes to workplaces and when it comes to rules in social media, usually if there's a rule for something, which is part of world building, just figuring out your rules and then following them and being consistent, there's usually a backstory behind the rule. Usually something happened that caused the rule to happen.
Yes. Yes. There was this show. I was just trying to Google it real quick. I can't remember the name of it, but it was I think it was a TV series, or maybe it was on some cable channel. I don't know. I caught one episode of it, and you have all these gods that are roaming around talking with each other at this party or something, and there's like a dozen different types of Jesus, because the whole premise that I got from that short episode that I watched part of is that whatever people manifested is how was the creation of these gods, that they actually manifested and created these gods. And that's kind of was and again, I can't tell you the name of the show, and I never watched the whole series or anything, but it was just that one element that people could manifest and create their gods in their image, and they actually became gods, is what gave me the inspiration to do this with TJ. Because TJ was a story that I wrote back in high school, that had a different premise to it, in relation to psychic abilities, that I've turned it into something else now and made it into something bigger and better, But I mean, that's just it. When you're creating these worlds, also take a look at what other people have used and how they've created things, and look for things that you like, don't like, things you want to change and stuff like that, and implement it a little bit, make it better.
Yeah, gods and mythological stuff often comes from the power of belief. Like, that's part of why, like, in most Greek gods or Roman god stories, like for instance Percy Jackson being one of them, um, usually the God, they always talk about this as like a part of the concept that the pro is, yes, I'm a god of this, and I can do all these magical cool stuff, and well, bam, you're shocked by lightning. But if people stop believing in said God, that God actually loses power. So in a lot of ways, we do manifest gods into reality in the sense that a God is only as power as the belief in them. And so that's something I also have played with in this story series is if people stop believing in said God, do they lose their power base? Like, is their power base based on the power of belief? Because if you're a God and nobody believes in you, then are you really a God, or are you a fictional like anecdote or a fictional stamp on that time period that you existed with power? And so it's something that's really important to think about because, you know, in our current world right now, technically the internet and data is the new God. It's a technological God. You
Yes.
know, Facebook and Twitter have become a big stamp and footprint in everybody's psyche on how things work. And often we put so much power, we put so much mental power into the belief that Twitter and Facebook and all these other different machinations of technology often control or influence or can manipulate how we see society and how we see fact or fiction. Because you have those things called fake news, and you have things called bots, and you have things like Elon has spent like the last 2 months tweeting nonstop about, oh, we're trying to delete all the bots. And it's like, this guy, being one of the richest people in the world, sees bots as a threat. So obviously, in our tech-based world, the machinations of technology is so strong that technology itself has become a god of its own nature. If you think
Oh,
about it from a mythological standpoint.
yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I disagree about the Elon thing. I think he thinks that there's good bots and bad bots because I think he sees bots as a tool and they're to be used properly. Okay. But
Is that why our follower counts keep dropping?
but anyways, hey, we said Elon. Maybe Elon will watch our show now. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe. I actually
Yeah.
like Elon, believe it or not. I find him funny. I find him interesting to listen to. And there was a couple spaces he dropped in on where he actually got a lot of his assistants and his people that were on his team to talk and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you can learn a lot by having Elon in a space because that guy can talk. Like here we are doing our podcast and whatever. That guy will go motor mouth and he'll start telling stuff. He'll start telling stuff that you'll start hearing his receptionist go, like trying to like stop him from revealing stuff. And he's just having, you know, fun. He's having the time of his life being able to just talk because that guy is so busy. He's spending 12 to 16-hour days just in LA trying to be at the headquarters and trying to fix an algorithm because he spent like $40 billion on it. And so, you know, that's a lot of money to blow on a tech app. And so, you know, he's trying his hardest to fix it and get things working again. But from what some of the people on the on Twitter said, there was a thread where this guy, I think his name is Ryan, and he was a pundit for a media site. Again, not recalling the media site's name, but I know he was Ryan. But he was basically in LA, and he was tweeting about being in LA, and it was showing pictures of like people on the streets, you know, homeless people and stuff. And he was talking about like how bad it is over there. But then he was talking about saying, you know, I think the mainframe glitched, but it had nothing to do with the coffee I spilt on it on accident. And like he was making jokes and stuff, and then like he made this giant thread of like all these things that they're working on over the last 2 weeks, and Elon literally just comes in clutch and goes accurate thread, and I'm like looking at this, and I'm like, this guy like is so engaging with a lot of this like he's so engaging with people. He's not just gonna like have some bot talk for him like Zuckerberg. He's gonna literally engage and drop in and talk and stuff. Like I actually like Musk. I do. I appreciate the work he's doing. He's pretty much working with a machine that's already self-imploding, and that's hard to work with, especially since someone kept asking. A lot of people kept asking him, "Can I have the job now, or can you step down?" Like he was making a poll saying, "I will step down," and everybody votes for it. And quite a few people were responding to it saying, "Yes, dropped out," because they were mad at him or something. And he was like, "Well, this machine's been falling and crumbling to bits since May. They're in massive debt, and and he like was painting out the whole picture of where Twitter is, and he's like, "You want the job?" I was just like going, way to do a mic drop there, Elon.
Yeah,
Oh, but like,
and
yeah,
just
that's
so
funny.
people know, when they're listening, they're going, "I thought we were talking about world building, and you're talking about Elon." It is world building
It's
because
part of our world.
Elon, Elon, this is real time, real world building in action. Elon has taken Twitter and recreating it into something hopefully better, something that can be used in a different way. And we're watching it real time. We're seeing all the comedy and controversy on it. We're seeing all the tweets. We're seeing all the people that are angry, all the people that are happy. This is a real time world building event. Okay. If you incorporate things like this into your writing,
It'll help it a lot.
yes, because you got to make little tweaks, not tweets, tweaks here and there
Make
to
all the
make it
tweets.
better, to make what you put on paper better.
Yeah,
You
because it's
know?
like, okay, let's put it this way. So if you are world building in a story and you have a big giant figurehead in your story, right? Like let's say it's Hunger Games, for instance. President Snow, dictator guy, like to control populations through fear, and and he uses power flexes to push his strength around. Elon in our world is another version of President Snow, only he's not a tyrant, and he champions free speech. He's a very rare force of nature in our world in which everyone wants to assume that if you have $1 billion, you're an evil person, and everyone wants to assume that if you have a giant fortune sitting around and you happen to be white, then you're not naturally evil. And so you have things stacked against you. And so in world building, when it comes to world building, you're thinking of it in a society level. In a society, you have your president, you have your different title of people, and then you have your figureheads, and you have your tech leaders, and you have your leadership levels, and then you have your followers. Like how every one of us have a Twitter account, and if like we keep in touch with each other by following each other's pages and alerting each other, it's the same fucking thing, only on a more sociological level. And we're all like, oh, we have this many followers. Oh, follow me, follow me, follow me. For me, I'm all about just engaging and all about just building up, people that I interact with and talk to. It's kind of like having a friend or something like that, having a friend base, only it's called followers. And, we, on an egotistical level on Twitter, are trying to criticize a guy who spent $40 billion on a tech app to try to advance something in a technological manner, and we're attacking him. So therefore, our ego is conflicting with his on a technological, sociological level. And I know that sounds weird, but it's true. Like, especially since a lot of us that are on Twitter, our ego is being affected if we lose followers, or our ego is being affected if we gain followers. And suddenly we get excited. Like me, I get excited when I see more people on my followers list, not because I'm like, yes, follow me, I'm a god. No, I'm just like going, cool, more people to connect with, more people to talk to. Because grand scheme of things, who am I? I'm Teapot. And I talked to Paul on a podcast about storytelling. We're a couple dorks who talk about mythological stuff and monsters and whatever. Who the fuck are we? But in a world building level, talking about Elon Musk, talking about Twitter, if you were to write a novel in 2022 right now, Elon would eventually get mentioned at some point if you're doing it in a factual based manner, especially to get reader buy-in. Because chances are you're going to take this exact novel that's from 2022 or 2023, and you're going to put it on Twitter, and if there's not one mention of Elon or tech or anything, someone's going to be like, oh, I'm questioning your ethics or your morality. They're questioning something, and so it's going to get mentioned, and so that's part of your world building. And he's a technological leader, so there you go.
Right. Well, just let's take Terminator, Skynet.
Yes, we are Skynet.
I mean, whether you like Elon, whether you don't like Elon, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. We're not talking about whether you
He's a
like him
human
or
being.
you don't like him. What we're talking about is the world building in real time and how it can be used in a book. I mean, think about it. Like T-Paw said, he bought a tech company. He's a billionaire. is he doing good things to do good things, or is he doing good things to pretend? Is it a charade? Is he actually preparing to dominate the world? I mean, you could look at it, you could rewrite it in many ways. And when you really look at what people are saying and how they're talking, they're writing it in real time. Because again, there's people that praise Elon, there's people that put him down, there's people that don't like Tesla, hate Tesla, love Tesla, Tesla fanboys on YouTube. You got it from all directions. You got Congress people that Elon's a good guy and he's doing this. You got Congress people, he doesn't pay his taxes, he needs to pay his fair share. You got people that are all of this. I mean, it's a book writing itself, and
Yeah, it is.
and look at how people are engaged in it. Well, when you take those elements and you
You
put
put it in
that
a
into
story.
your world, okay, people that are criticizing, people that are critiquing, people that do this behind the scenes, people that are trying to do this and are really good, you create a world that people start to engage in, especially if they can associate it with the real world today, especially if they can feel it. Okay. That's the other part of world building. I mean, we discussed the senses, seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing, feeling. Don't forget the emotions. Okay. You got to have anger. You got to have fear. You got to have love. You got to have frustration. You got to have sadness. And I know people are like, but Paul, that's characters. You have to have an environment in that world. Okay. And you can have a frustrating environment in your world where you have people that are joyous and happy because they see beyond the things that are causing the frustration. It's all part of building the world. Okay. And that goes in then into your character developments. Now, you don't have to create a dynamic world. All right. I want you to really think about this. You can create a very minuscule world and still show all of these elements on a grand scale and with your character development. The example is 12 Angry Men. Have you ever
Or
seen that show, that
I
movie,
can't.
12 Angry Men?
Yes, I have actually.
Okay. It's all about a court case and 12 people in a room. And you look at the room, when you really think about the setting of it, it says a lot. The atmosphere of it, the feeling, the claustrophobia, the God, I just don't want to be here anymore. God, I am fighting for this person's rights. The emotional aspect of the room is frustration.
You
And
want to
now
know
characters
another
take that
aspect?
on. Huh?
You want to know another good example that plays onto what you're talking about?
Okay.
A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Boom.
Small town, and the only time it ever gets big is when they're in their dreams. And usually, when they're in their dreams, they're being chased by a monster, and the monster is wearing a straw hat, a glove with blades on it, and a Christmas sweater, and his face is burned.
Yes.
And that dream world ends up affecting their real world, and it's a small town, and it's a high school with high school kids, and the town wants to lie about what happened with that masked man, with that burned face man
Right.
named Freddy Krueger. And so the entire town is cowering in fear every time Nancy or her friends ever bring up Mr. Krueger and ever bring up the fact that he's attacking them. And yet their friends are mysteriously dying in jail cells in their bedroom. Johnny Depp's character, he dies, listening to music and stuff. Nancy's, getting antagonized by this monster character. Also, one of my antagonists in Braxton, inspired by Freddy Krueger. So that's why I brought it up, the tie in there. But you can do small worlds, like really small. That's kind of what I do with Orion's character. Is acknowledging the kingdoms, it's acknowledging the other stuff. But if we really think about it, I go small scale with Orion because the budget goes from prince to suddenly clerk at a convenience store. And so, therefore, the only time he ever gets big is when he's in his dreams, like whenever he's falling asleep and he's, smoking a blunt and being like, suddenly he's, exited his body in, in the dream realm and he's doing things there. But yeah, no, you could do small scale. You could do small scale and have a really, really well built world and not have to do anything big. Like you don't have to do kingdoms. You don't have to do giant, worlds or whatever or galaxies. You could do something so small and so close knit and yet emotionally just fuck with your reader, like, or your viewer.
Yes, yes. Now let's get to the editing aspect. Okay. I personally, the most important part of editing, obviously, you got to make sure your timeline is good, your the way you choreograph it, the way you present and explain things, making sure that things are understandable. Obviously, I think the most important aspect and the hardest part when it comes to editing, excuse me, first, second, and third person. Now, very few people ever use second person. First person, past or present. Third person, past or present. Vocabulary is probably the most important part of editing and which person that you're editing for. And I have found that because TJ, I'm writing in third person, present and past, because of there's a part of it where it's in present, and then when they're using the VR, they're in past. So I'm writing in third person, two tenses, because I'm running two storylines. Okay. Then Blood Schism, Rainbow Prophecy is being written in first person present. And that is hard. That is
Oh,
hard.
I
Okay.
bet.
And when you go back and you edit, you catch a lot of these things. And I encourage a lot of people like to read in their head when they're reading their stuff as they're writing it. Read it out loud because that's where you're going to catch stuff.
Record it too. Like if you have a decent, like if you're on Spaces anyway and you're like talking to people, record yourself reading. It doesn't have to be, something that's consumed by an audience. Record yourself reading the story, and then that way, when you play it back, I'll literally record segments of my story. I'll record like 3 paragraphs, or I'll record like a few pages, or I'll record like half a scene, just to see how it sounds. And I'll literally just record it because I have my studio I've been building anyway with like Adobe and my professional mic, which eventually at some point when my laptop is fixed, I'll be using this fucker. It's a HyperX microphone, but it's the thing I'm going to be using for my audiobook creation. And what I've been doing is I've been doing test runs. I've been recording to edit. I'll sit there and record like a page or record a few pages at a time. And it's not to do it for the audiobook. It's so that I can listen to it out loud and be like, well, that sounded terrible. Well,
Yes.
that was cringy. Let me go ahead and rewrite that part, or that part didn't make sense out loud, or what the hell was I thinking when I wrote that? And that way, it like gets you to really hear it out loud. Because if you're going to be an author who goes on stage and like reads to an audience, or you're going to be an author who, just lets it just sit there, then it can easily just sit there, whatever. But a lot of us authors who, in the old world of publishing, would have to go on tour. I've never done that myself, but I've heard a lot of stories and I've seen a lot of people there, my betters, do it really well. You'll have to read to people and you'll have to read it out loud. And if you get turned into an audiobook, somebody's either going to do it for you or you're going to do it yourself, or both, whatever. And either way, it's going to be turned into an audio version anyway. So why don't you just practice turning it into an audio version, even if it's a small version or small snippets of versions, so you can hear the parts that are really like fucking with you, and especially the parts you love. Like if you're like writing, you're like, wait, I love this page. This page is amazing. It's a godsend. And then you read it out loud and you're like, well, that fucking sucked.
Yeah. Yes.
And then you make it better. You elevate it. You take it and you level it up in its quality. And that way you go from being, well, that was amazing, to like, wait, I need to tweak a couple things. Shit, let me remove a word, or let me remove some passive voice that's stuck in. And that way you can hear it out loud. Because a lot of us are very audio driven. That's why we listen to audiobooks. That's why we watch podcasts. That's why we watch shows or whatever, is because we can hear the language. We can hear the pops, the S's, the T's, the enunciations. We can hear when, let's say, that person's saying a thing in their sentence, and then like halfway through the sentence, it goes weird because our brain was going faster than our fingers or something. Me. And when you're going in there, you can be like, wait, I need to remove a word, or I need to change the way this is sounding because, like, it just sounds weird. And so that's part of editing. Is part of editing is being able to look at it with a critical eye. It's good to have multiple external eyes, but if you only have one, yourself, you don't want your own pair of eyes, and then you hire an editor, you'll at least have one set of pair of eyes that has seen the story outside of yourself. Not recommended to have family look at it, honestly. That's why, like, I have my wife. I bounce off things off my wife all the time when it comes to creating it. But when it comes to like somebody else that I don't know in person, or somebody else that I don't know on Twitter that like doesn't know, like for instance, Paul, for instance, if I were to write a story and I had Paul look at it, I would at least have another pair of eyes look at it because Paul is going to have some inherent bias. And so it's good to have somebody that can look at it objectively and be like, well, that didn't make sense. I mean, I know you like that part of the story, and I know that like it really, like, you're passionate about it and you obviously love it. I'm not trying to attack it, but why is it in here? And suddenly you can be like, well, that fucked up, lift, and you say, and this is what I do. I'll literally highlight that part of the story. I'll lift it out of the draft, and if like you yourself have your own system, you know what it's doing, put it in another document and put it there. But as an actual helpful tip, label it and say, this came from this part of the story. Or write out a note that says, hey, this is what this is. So you're not revisiting and being like, the fuck was I doing there? Shit. And then you have to like, but me, I'm really good at like organically being able to reform it to whatever is going on in the story. But if you're somebody that can't do that, then write out a note on what it is. That way it helps you.
Right. And here's something else that you want to pay attention to, especially when you're reading it out loud. You're reading it for groups, okay? Like we do on Spaces. There's a few people like the writer Daigle, L.R. Evans. They hold writing spaces where you can come in and read your pieces.
Total badasses, by the way.
Yes. It's good because you get feedback on, and critique on what you're writing. But here's something else I want you to remember when you're doing your writing. I'm going to give you an example, and it's going to be from a poem. I'm just going to read the first stanza of my villanelle here. And there's a reason for that, because I'm going to read it twice. I'm going to read it as somebody who's reading it would read it. I come for you in the brightest of light. You know who I am, even if not by name. I come for you in the darkest of night. Now, when I wrote this and I read it like this in my head. I come for you in the brightest of light. You know who I am, even if not by name. I come for you in the darkest of night. Now, when you're writing and you're editing and you are reading it with that type of emotion or whatever, you have to portray that in your writing, that's the emotion that is being felt, so that when your reader is reading it, they're reading it with that emotion. Okay? Because if you're just writing it and you in your head know what the emotion is, and you're not making sure that the reader knows what that emotion is, then they're going to read it like I did the first time. They're just going to read it. And there's no feeling to that. Okay? But if you write it when you're doing your editing and you're reading it out loud, just remember when you're reading it out loud, you're reading it from the emotion that you already know that you wrote it from. Make sure that you have that incorporated into the words so that if somebody else is reading it, that's how they're going to read it. Otherwise,
exactly.
You may have a fabulous story that has no emotional context to it. And this goes back to world building. When you're creating your world, you have to have emotional context. When you're creating your characters, you have to have that emotional context. Because if the people can't pick up on that emotional context and what they're reading, they're just going to read it bland, monotone. There it goes. Got to get the emotion in there.
Yep. No, completely agreed. Because like if you're sitting there reading out, like let's say there's dialogue lines that I have written for characters in my stories and stuff, and like for instance, Murdrin. He's a mythological character. He's technically a necromancer scientist who sees himself as a god, and there are people that follow him quite frequently. He's got legions of followers that we haven't explored yet in the story. So naturally, he's got godly energy. And whenever I read him out loud, I give him like this, I am Murdred. And like he said, he has like that very baritone, very deep quality, mythological quality to him. But there could be somebody out there who reads him like, I'm Murdred. Or someone that gives him a weird voice because that's just how they're reading it in their head.
Right. Well, see, whenever I read a book, I give everybody a voice,
Yeah.
but I'm giving them that voice based upon what I'm reading so that I can tell the difference between the characters. And if you're not portraying the emotional aspect of the character, how the person's going to feel or sound, a depth in the voice, or an accent or a fear or something like that, it's going to get missed. And then part of the context gets missed where, again, you may have an excellent story. I watch movies all the time where I'll watch, it'll be like a horrible movie with such a great concept, with a great idea. And it's like, did they not check it for emotion? Because the context isn't there. Now, that could also be bad direction too. It's like just read the lines and there we go. But bottom line is if you're not feeling something when you're reading, then this is where it's good to have like a beta reader, somebody else read it to see if they get that feeling, that emotion. It's good to come into Twitter Spaces when they have reading rooms so that you can hear other people read and you can read your stuff and see if they feel that. And then when you're rereading it, it's just like, because even if you're reading it with the emotion, and someone who really picks up on this is L.R. Evans, Luke. If you're reading something with all this emotion and the emotion isn't in the writing, Luke will say, well, why? Luke will catch that stuff. So
will I. Like
yeah.
it's very obvious when the writing the words themselves lacks the emotion that you're trying to give it because of the fact that it's just words on text. But at the same time, like there's a tone to it. Like there's a tone shift, and it's you've got to be able to find a way to incorporate. And that's when I talked about latching emotions and characters onto world building. That's part of it. It's incorporating what emotion is this story writing off of. Like even if it's just chapters of a story, those chapters themselves have to write off of emotion, and they have to write off of the connection of the characters to the story, because otherwise it's just stuff happening. Right. It's just stuff.
Right. The other thing when editing is to watch for repetitiveness in words, phrases like he said blah 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 blah, and then he said blah 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 blah, and he said this, then blah 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 blah, and then after he said that, he said this blah 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 blah. He said. Watch for those things. There's been a lot of times where I've written like 4 or 5 pages, and I think it's excellent, and I'll go into a reading space and I'll read it, and it's just like, oh my God, because I'm reading it out loud for the first time. And it's just like, yep, he said, okay, he said, all right, lots of he said's here. Okay, yep, I'll catch it. And then one of the first critiques will be, Paul, you said he said a lot. Yes, I know. Thank you. I know. And I appreciate it. I got it. I realized it, So reading out loud when you're editing, read out loud to yourself. Read it out loud. Yeah, you have to do it because then you're going to know what you sound like. And then, like T-Paw suggested, even record yourself, listen to the recording. it'll definitely help you with your writing. It'll definitely help you with your writing.
And also alternate, instead of hey, he said, he exclaimed, he growled, or an action tag, like attach an action tag of like, what is that character doing while they're talking? Because like literally dialogue is talking. And so if you're only focusing on writing out dialogue and then saying he said, it's like, okay, well, that's nice that he said, but what is he doing? Or what are they doing? Like, what's happening? Like, are they just talking and that's it? Like nothing else is happening. It's like imagining, how expensive it is to contract with an editor. It depends, honestly, on the editor. Some editors that are like in New York or whatever will cost thousands of dollars. You could find freelance ones that cost anywhere from 300 to 700 or 1,000, but it also depends on the quality. Like you get what you pay for, and unless you are really well, like unless the sample you get from the editor shows that they're really good at what they're doing, and yet you're only paying a certain amount, then obviously you're getting a steal. You're getting a deal. But it really depends on that. But as far as like action tags, like I will literally sit there and be writing a scene. I'll be editing a scene, right? And I'll like literally like dissect and analyze my own chapter, and I'll be like, they're literally just talking. And like there was a part where I had to send a thing to a publisher recently, and I was reading the chapter, and I was like, okay, so he's describing the moon, he's describing this, he's describing, when are they going to start talking? So I had to move some stuff around because I'm like, wait. And then like a little later, I was like, wait, they're just talking to each other. It's like you froze the movie while you're having the characters podcast or something. And so I had to like remember to incorporate actions and incorporate things they were doing as well on top of the talking. Because like you can have dialogue happening, but you have to be able to incorporate what they're doing because time isn't just stopping for these characters. Like they're not just stopping unless there's a serious lull period and you're able to balance the lull with what is happening. Hope that makes sense for pacing, but that's part of editing.
Right, right. I was going to respond to Bryce also. How expensive is it to contract with an editor? Hopefully, you'll find a good literary agent and you'll be contracted with a reputable publishing company, and it will cost you nothing for an editor. That's the best price you're going to get. If you're
Yep.
going to self-publish or have it edited before you try to get it published, like T-Paw said, it could run as little as a few $100 up to like 700. You may also have again, depending upon who you're calling and what they're going to do for you, they could run as much as like 10 grand. I
Yep.
know, plus the size of your book, what you're trying to have edited. My first book, The Red Herring Effect, the few editors that I called to see about editing, I was looking at 10 grand because it's a 400 page, 200,000 word book, and nonfiction, which means I also had a lot of cited material, so they were going to have to check for the cited material and stuff like that. It was going to be expensive. So
It's a pretty
obviously,
penny.
is there good software for the use of self editing?
There's a few of them. There's Grammarly. There's a couple of ones that are not coming to my head, but there's Grammarly, and then there is Pro Writing Aid. That's one of them. There's a couple of different ones. Their free ones are fine. They work for basic editing. But if you're like wanting to get to the nitty gritty, you do have to pay a little more to get more of an editing. But if you're going to be having a human edit your work anyway later on, then just use the stuff for free and then let the editor do the rest of the work. That way they at least get a clean version of the story, so that you can tackle it. But if you can't even afford a regular editor, then just pay the highest tier you can afford. But yeah, it's not cheap to do any editing.
Yeah, exactly. I when I wrote my book, I used spell check, and there was a thesaurus app that I downloaded, and what it would do is it would check my sentence structure, which was very helpful. Like if you end the sentence with a preposition, it would catch that for you. And that didn't cost me anything. So if you're already good with grammar, spell check, good. Bryce, look for an AI editor in the future. Um, Bryce, they're coming out with AI attorneys and lawyers. So, pretty soon that's going to be a thing. I guarantee you. You're going to be able to hire an AI editor, and they're going to go through all your stuff and just fix it for you. And tell you that you can't talk about this, but you can talk about this, and this we're taking out. So
it's like comes back to the AI editor, edits it, and then like you get the copy of what they edit back, and then suddenly out of nowhere half the story's gone. Or giant chunks are missing, and you're like, what the hell just happened?
What do you mean you got to take out the first 29 of the 30 chapters? What? Started chapter 30? No.
Right? Exactly. It's like the story took forever to start, so I got rid of it.
Yes. Bryce, thank you for your questions. I really appreciate it, brother. Thank you. Editing is probably the hardest part of the whole thing, especially when you're going back through. I encourage people, and again, it doesn't work for everybody. I'm guilty of doing this myself, editing as I go. I call it soft editing. For myself, I do soft editing as I go. Trying to make sure my sentence structure is correct, my words are spelled correctly, and the paragraph actually makes sense to the fucking story before I go on. After that, I don't worry about past, present tense, first person, third person, past, present. I don't worry about that aspect of it on my initial run through. Obviously, I try to be aware of it as I'm writing. And if I catch something, I try not to fuss on it, because then I start looking for more. And now I come to a point where it's just like, okay, I've trapped myself. I got to fix this before I go on. God damn it. And that's what I'll do is I'll spend the next 3 hours fixing one goddamn paragraph because I said something in past instead of present. And it's like, okay, eliminate the ED, eliminate the ED, eliminate the ED, eliminate the ED.
It's something you're in the corner of Paul.
Yeah. So write the story, get it all done, and then when it's done, now go back and beat yourself up.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, thing that I learned over the years as someone who edits my own work and will give it to an editor and let them take a stab at it, and usually after I've done the whole Grammarly or the Pro Writing Aid approach, or even Microsoft Word, because I'll bounce between two different editors, because when I was in college, that's what I was doing, is I was using Grammarly and I was using Word, and usually they're pretty in sync with each other. But I would do both, and then I would go in and send it to an editor. But for me, I like to keep it simple. I use the KISS method when I edit. Instead of like getting too in depth with it, what I'll do is I'll make sure the grammar and the punctuation, all the writing rules are correct. And then I will do my best to look for tenses, and I'll do my best to look for, places where you could stick a description in, or places where you could enhance the text or make it less passive voice. But once I get past all of that, and I have like this list of things that I can tackle, after that, it's just letting somebody else with eyeballs look at it, because then at that point, you're hacking away at, it's like you're washing a dish and you've already re-rinsed it off like 17 times with soap and water. And there's like one spot at the bottom that is giving you such hell. So at that point, you just let hot water drop into the bowl and you just walk away from it for a bit with soap in it. You come back and you find out that spot just needed to have another extra soap onto it. That way you're not scrubbing it for an hour and a half. So, help future you out and don't get stuck in your own head. Because if you do, you're going to put yourself into a prison of your own making. And so with editing, editing is literally just correcting. That's all it is. It's just correcting something that was messed up. And so I would just, make your job easier for yourself. Because if not, then you're going to get stuck. Yeah. And there's no right way of saying it either, because everyone's process is different. I just simply gave you some of mine. But And mine is just a simplistic way. I literally, with this story, Snake of the Dame, I'm literally using the same process I learned from college, which is draft out the whole thing and then go in and tackle adding in whatever pieces that you missed, and then and also have a list of things that you're wanting to add into it, so that you have something to reference to, or that way you don't get stuck in your own thoughts. But look at the list as you're adding stuff in, and then once you do that, look for flow. And then once you do that, once you've run out of things to add in or ideas that came up to you, don't cut anything yet. Don't cut anything yet, because if you cut anything, then suddenly you're going to have to re-add it, and then suddenly you're going to mess up the flow. Well, don't cut anything out yet. Just run through everything, run through every goddamn thing you can. Then you correct all the technical stuff, and then you look for stuff to lift. Because once you've already done that, all you're doing is just chopping off the fat, and then you're not removing any vital information. You're just like, well, that didn't work for the story. Lift. That didn't work for the story. Lift. And you've already helped out future you, because you're not writing yourself into a wall.
Yep. And the other thing is, don't be too hard on yourself. I am published. I do have a book that was published. Okay. Red herring effect. And when my editor went through it, because my wife and I, and God bless her, my wife, she's brilliant. Thank you. And we went through this book like you wouldn't believe so many times. And then when it went through the editing process, a lot of grammatical stuff in there. The biggest thing that I got dinged on was him/her versus them, they, their. Okay. Whenever I would do him/her, they would say, no, that's a their or a they or a them. And when I would do they, them, or their, they would say, no, that should be a his/her. So that was my biggest area of default or error. But I also want you to know that since I have been edited, every book that I've read since then, I look for errors. I just simply do it now. I can't help myself. And it doesn't matter who publishes the book, whether it's low end, high end, like Simon and Schuster. You are going to find errors in the book because they can't catch them all. It might be as simple as the word me should be B. They put an M instead of a B, or they transpose the H and the A in that somehow. But they occur. They occur. So you're not going to catch every one. I have read a lot of books, and I am blown away now. Well, I'm not so much blown away anymore, but I was initially at how many errors I would catch in books published by huge writers, with huge publishing agencies. And it's just like, wow, they can't catch them all. So every writer is going to make mistakes. Don't let it stress you out.
Just to playfully tease at Jay for a second, since we're going to be doing an in-depth review of his work, their work in the future. The first night that I was reading Magnovi, or the Songbirds, that. First time I was reading the book and I was diving into it, I sent Jay a couple screenshots where I literally highlighted the word that was left in there, because they obviously use Control F to find all the swear words and then change them. So I went into the book, screenshot it, highlighted the word, because I like the word that's in there. But I highlighted it, said ha, 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 and I sent it to Jay, and Jay said, shit. Because the one word that was the fuck bomb wasn't changed to swive. And I thought it was funny as hell. I was like, it's still PG-13 if that's the only one. And Jay was just laughing so hard.
Since we're talking about Jay,
yes,
we're talking about Magnify. Jay's not on here, so I'm not going to say what the cipher is. Okay?
You figured it out.
I figured it out. I called Jay like the next day or whatever and told him what it was. And he's like, you got it. But just so you know, I figured it out. I got it. I'm the first one to have figured it out.
I'm gonna be next.
Yes, it's a cipher within a cipher, just so you know.
Okay, all right.
All right, because once you figure out all the words, you then have to figure out the sentences.
Oh shit. Okay, this is gonna be fun. Yeah, I just so you guys know, I'm shooting for this date. We'll see how it goes, but February 28th is going to be the drop for Snake and the Dame. Um, and like I said before, I'm dropping multiple books this year, but Snake and the Dame is going to be dropping at the end of this month. It's on pre-order right now. I actually dropped the price down to $2.99 so that after the publication date, it'll go back up to $5.99. But right now it's $2.99. You can buy the ebook. I am printing it. I already have a paperback spread and everything ready for it. But we're working on publication. I am waiting to hear back from a publisher on whether they want to take it on. If not, I'll still just be indie. It'll be indie either way because the publisher's pretty indie. But either way, Snake and the Dame is going to be re-released, the second edition. It's called Second Print of Blood Edition. And we're working on trying to get that out by the end of the year. I just figured I'd plug that before the podcast ended.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, T-Paw. Excellent show. Just to let everybody know, tomorrow, Jeremy Baker, a.k.a. Sergeant Nobody, Comedy and Controversy. We are going to be talking about Big Pharma versus weed. A good conversation. So that'll be tomorrow. And then on Sunday, we have the debut episode of my segment called Becoming Stoic with Elizabeth Masters. Check it out, Becoming Stoic, this Sunday. It'll be on every Sunday. And just a reminder, next Sunday, I will have Becoming Stoic. It will be every week. But I also have an exclusive interview next Sunday, right before Becoming Stoic, with Joe Walsh, Congressman Joe Walsh.
So, hell yeah.
Yes.
And smoke one while you're listening to them talk about weed and big establishment and big pharma. Smoke a fat one while you're listening to it, so you can be like, "Big pharma, yeah!" Like, fuck you.
Yep. Yep. And then just to let everyone know, L.R. Evans will be back on Tuesday next week. Luke will be back. Luke has some awesome news to tell everybody. Part of the reason why Luke has been unavailable is because Luke has been working on a very huge project, and that project has come to fruition. So Luke will be sharing next Tuesday on Tuesday Takes. Make sure to join us for the big news next Tuesday. And then, of course, we have Shadow Fox on Wednesday with The Flow. Make sure you check us out. And, of course, Shadow Fox, I love her. She did an awesome little tweet and all that with me and my segments that I have every week. Did a little collaboration with them all and put them all together. So that was awesome. Thank you again, Shadow Fox. I love you. It's 5 shows a week now. 5 shows a week. Tuesday Takes, The Flow, The Vellum, Comedy and Controversy, and Becoming Stoic. 5 shows a week.
Yep, well done, sir. Well done. There will be a link for the Snake and the Dame pre-order in the description, by the way, so that if you guys need to look at it, it'll help you direct you directly to the book. So that'll be available for you as well.
All right, awesome. All right, everybody, remember: be kind, be happy, and may good things come your way. Thank you.
Same bat time next week.